I'm Elmer Dixon, President of Executive Diversity Services. I'm here to talk about the movie Blue Bayou. The most important reason that I think it's important to talk about this movie is that we are still, as a nation, in the middle of an immigration crisis. And by immigration crisis, I mean families are still being torn apart. Immigrants are still being deported from this country, many of them unnecessarily or maybe even illegally. This movie, which was made in 2021 and got into the theaters, was there for like a week or two at the longest before it was pulled. And then I want to talk about it and really ask the question, why was it pulled so quickly? Antonio LeBlanc is a Korean adoptee raised in a small town in Louisiana. He's married to the love of his life. They have a beloved stepdaughter, his stepdaughter, who's a key character in this movie. And she's pregnant, his wife. And they're struggling to make a better life for his family when he soon finds out that he'll be confronting ghosts in his past about being in this country, and he's facing deportation. This movie was directed by a young Korean actor, Chon, who also stars in the movie, and he's really bringing to light the plight of many people who were brought to the United States as children and who have grown up all of their lives living in the United States and in their communities and their families, contributing to their communities, and suddenly are facing deportation. I think that's number one, why I think this movie is so important. The movie also shows the strong connection that these individuals have with their community and also with their families and the hardships they go through. And I think it's important to illustrate this and ask the question why a movie like this has been put to the backdrop and not brought to light. More people need to know about this movie. I actually, when I saw it in the theater, because I am a movie buff and I see just about everything that comes out, and I spotted it the first week that it came out, and went to see it right away. And within a week or two at the most, the movie was gone. I went to one of the art house theaters that I belong to over in Tacoma, Washington. That's a small art house theater. And I was surprised that they weren't showing it, because these are the types of movies that they would show that are not going to make it on a lot of the big screens. They're not going to be at the big cineplexes. And they usually will pick up a movie like this. And when I mentioned it to them, they had never even heard of it. That said to me that there was something about this movie being kept in the dark, and or at least I know that when movies do not have like large backing from a studio, that they're not going to get the advertising, et cetera, et cetera. But I've seen a lot of small art house movies that have gotten recognition, have stayed in these art house theaters for at least a few weeks. But this was not the case. So it begs the question, why? We're in the middle of the war in Ukraine. When I say we, I mean as a world, because it's affecting economies and people globally. We're also still grappling with the pandemic that has been a part of our lives for the last 2.5 years. And those things have taken center stage, as they should. But at the same time, we should not forget what is going on still behind the scenes, that many people are still being separated and ripped apart from their families. And I thought that this story that the director put together was a very compelling story. It was a heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching story about this couple and their daughter and their soon-to-be next child, and how they're just suddenly ripped apart. The plot centers around the character Antonio LeBlanc, who is a tattoo artist. He has been in and out of jobs, and that's the one profession that he's known that has been consistent for him. When he finds out that his wife is pregnant, he is desperately trying to find a new position. In fact, the movie opens up at a scene with him being interviewed for a job, and the interviewer, asks him, "Where are you from?" And he says, "Well, I'm from." And he gives this little small town in the Louisiana Bayou, and he says, "No, where are you from?" It's a question all too often that many people that don't look like the dominant culture in this country are asked, "Where are you from?" As if just because you look different, you can't be from the United States. He then explains to the interviewer that he was brought to the U.S. as a baby, adopted as a very small child by adoptive parents, which is how he got to the United States and has grown up in the United States. And so the interviewer continues to tell him, "Well, we don't need people like you." And he said, "Well, I can do the job. I work real hard, and I think he's at an automotive shop or something, a motorcycle company, and he knows how to work on motorcycles, small engines, anything." And he says, ask him, "Do you have a record?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I got in a little bit of trouble, but that was a long time ago," meaning when he was a kid. And he said, "What did you do?" And he said, "Well, I stole a few things." He said, "What did you steal?" And he said, "Well, motorcycles." And the guy said, "Look, what are you currently doing?" He says, "Well, I have a job as a tattoo artist." And he said, "Well, you go do that." And his daughter is sitting there listening to this. His stepdaughter, who really has adopted this guy as her dad, fallen in love with him, and he's adopted her as his own. And interesting, hard reality at the opening of the movie, how many immigrants face this scrutiny, one, because they don't look like the American person ideal, whatever that is, and because many Americans think that these immigrants have no business here. And I think it's interesting to state that you've got many people, immigrants who were here as babies and raised here, who are now being forced out. Many immigrants who are trying to get into the country, stuck at the borders, who have been watching Ukrainians be ushered into the country without question, right through the door. I just heard that in a talk show just a couple of weeks ago. So Ukrainians, look like white Americans. They're ushered right into the country, while those that appear different or people of color are stuck at the border. So, without giving a lot away in the movie, because I think it's important that you see it, he gets into a situation where he has to prove that he's legally in the United States. And as it turns out, the DREAM Act it was like a grace period, allowed for children born in the United States to stay in the US. And that was the DREAM Act. And as it turns out, the parents who adopted him, who were abusive, did not legally adopt him. They didn't complete the paperwork. So now he's not eligible. And so he's facing deportation. So that's a key element in the movie. And I won't tell you the rest of the details. I encourage you to see this very important movie.